Hi and welcome to the Honeypot podcast.
Oh wait,
this is actually...
are you talking English right now? Yes, you are.
Sorry?
Because we have an English guest, right?
Oh. That was a bit confusing.
Yes.
In the middle of my intro.
Yes. I just wanted to tell the audience that we are speaking English today.
It is. It's actually our first English episode. I was a little bit caught off guard, or how you say, with your comment there.
Sorry
for that. But we usually say that this is the podcast if you want to get better insights, ideas, and results in your innovation work.
Oh, yes.
And my name is Alexander Wennerberg Larsson, and I usually have my wonderful friend
Fredrik Heghammar. I love to say my name in English, like Fredrik Heghammar. Yes, today we are having a guest today, and a friend of mine. I can call you friend nowadays. We met maybe it was a year ago, or was it 1.5 maybe? And it's Lech Guzowski, right?
Precisely.
Welcome. Yeah,
thank you very much. It's a pleasure.
Pleasure to have you. We actually met when we were on. Was it a podcast or a webinar?
I think it was a podcast. We've connected on LinkedIn a couple of years ago, but exchanged a few messages when I was on my journey of searching for a job in Stockholm, and I think I reached out to you then. But then we reconnected last year at the start of the pandemic, and It just kind of I've invited you onto my podcast, and that's kind of how we met and kind of how the friendship developed.
Yes, but I think we were on the product with Petra first, right?
We did one together, you and I, on the culture of innovation, and we had Petra join us for that. Yes,
and it was so funny because you connected with Petra, and Petra is my neighbor, so it's kind of fun. It's such a small world. And at that time, you were based in London, but you're originally from Poland, and now you're back in Poland.
Indeed, I was in the UK at the time when we connected, and I'm in between places. So I'm between Poland and the UK, and traveling a little bit as much as COVID allows. So it kind of depends where I fancy. And now that I'm in the remote working freelancer consultant world for the first time in my career, really, it's been for the past 2 years. But now that I'm no longer chained to a desk, I can be wherever I want. So UK is still sort of permanent base for me, though.
Yeah, and today we have invited you because you are very much into organizational culture, and we invited you to talk about a little bit, innovation and the role that innovation can play in a culture, or how do you create a culture around innovation. We just want to pick your brain on that topic, because the purpose with this and the aim for this podcast is to, help the listeners to actually get going with innovation, give them tips and tricks on how to take action, basically. And we know that, it won't be any action if you don't have the culture, with you. So what's your point on innovation within a culture, basically?
Yes, culture is a topic that I get along with very, very well, and that's something that I've done ever since my project management days. That's kind of where that passion started, because a lot of the work that I used to do in project management was actually removing obstacles for people, to be able to deliver on what they need to do to deliver the project. So I
facilitate them to be able to do a good
much job. Enable them to be able to do that. And to the annoyance of my superiors, because although the projects were delivered, I wasn't doing it in the standard traditional way. And that's what made me realize that this is where I want to focus. And innovation, I guess, fits into that as well. Is like, how do we create that environment of where people can innovate? So to be able to innovate, first of all, we need to have the space to think. How do we have space to think? Well, we need to be in the right environment to be able to think. An environment where you don't have to be worried about certain things, about if you do pitch an idea, it's not going to be ridiculed. It's not going to be judged. That you can have that safety of speaking up and being creative, experimenting. So we've got a lot of these
and it's so common. I mean, it's every time when we ask our clients like, why are you not working more with innovation? It's quiet for a while, and then someone says, it's a fear of failure, basically, and that fear. I think in Sweden we are a little bit, as I wrote on your post the other day. We're more. It's less fear here in company culture than in, for example, US and UK. I think and we. I mean, it has to do with our social security, of course, and the social network we have, and stuff like we kind of are fostered by questioning whoever we want to question, basically. Which could be a good thing. Usually it's a good thing. Sometimes it's just silly, but usually it's a good thing.
No, it definitely is. Definitely is. It's the propensity to be able to do that is different for different cultures, right? And to have that familiarity and feeling comfortable with the people that you're around with, that will differ between countries. Poland, Sweden, UK. I would say very different countries. I think UK would be on the complete end of the scale. Sweden, Poland, probably on the similar side of the fence, if you want to group that way, similar level. I haven't really worked within an organization as an employee at Sweden, so can't really tell. But from interacting with people, yes, I can sense it's a little bit closer to Poland. But I think Poland is very much still very formal and very, very strict. So I would say that the psychological safety is actually not there. That people are concerned about that. But innovation is so much more than just psychological safety. You get the usual willingness to experiment, allowing people to fail, and all things like that. But these in themselves are not enough. You need behaviors to counterbalance these things, right? So it's not just encouraging people to fail, but encouraging people to learn from that failure. How do they learn effectively from that, rather than just, if we failed, let's move on to the next one. No, what have you learned? And also on top of that is having set examples set. I don't want to say KPIs because I actually don't like that word, because I don't want to be putting too much metrics, but at least when you start to have an idea of what good and bad looks like, what a failure might potentially look like, what will you learn from that? And experimentation is the same. It's encouraging people to try that. Okay, but when you try, again, have an idea when you will call it quits. When is the time, okay, we've tried, it's not going to work. Rather than going down that route and spending weeks and months trying an idea that doesn't, and you still have to have that person who looks at the data, looks at the inputs and says, no, we're cutting this off. There's no point in pursuing this. So basically strategic quitting is another example here.
Yeah. So something that we practice and preach a lot is quantity to find quality. And I thinking about it when you're talking right now, it's like that itself is kind of fostering a experimental environment, because if you go for quantity, you don't have time like a normal project where you run one thing for 6 months. That's not doable when you work with quantity, because you need to run with 100 things in 1 month instead, and that kind of by itself limits the time that you spend on it to try to find opportunities.
But I think a pretty important word here as well, as you mentioned, Lech, the importance of having a learning culture, because I've seen a lot of trends in developing cultures where you really celebrating failures in a way that the failures is a goal themselves, instead of being something that you learn from. I almost
question that a little bit, because I hear people say that a lot, but have you actually been in a organization where you celebrate failures? Because I think that's a myth. I never experienced
really it. I can't say celebration like in having a party for every failure.
Here's a cake, you failed. Congratulations.
But no, no, not in that way. But really trying to, I don't want to say, celebrate failure, but trying to celebrate failures, because I think that's a myth. I can't say celebrating like in having a party for every failure. But no, not in that way. But really trying to create a culture where failure is okay.
But that's a different thing. That's a totally different thing.
Definitely. But rather than having a failure, the goal of the failure is to learn how we could do things in another way, rather than, all right, now we got 10 failures, let's move on.
Yeah.
That was pretty much what I meant. Not celebrating like in having a party, but and confetti.
No, but I think
really,
it's important because I mean, you hear a lot about Amazon. You know, that's the story that goes around that Amazon we celebrate our failures. It's like, no, you pack your bags and leave if you fail. You know, maybe that's celebrating. I don't know. Not to me. But
when it comes to the big boys, the Amazons, the Facebooks, the Apples, I've been growing increasingly disillusioned with what we learn about them, because Google and all these big companies are being given as examples of these fantastic cultures and environments, and bean bags and all that stuff. And the more I learn, the more I become aware of that. I know that this is an illusion of what's actually going on. They might have great practices that we can all learn from, but there's a lot of high costs that we're not talking about when it comes to those organizations. And one of the most ones is basically such organizations chew people up and spit them out, quite literally. When they've used them, when they've got all the brain power from them, people burn out. I'm not saying that they intend to do that, but that's what happens. People burn out because of the long hours, the stress, the anxieties, the politics, and everything that's involved inside. How can you innovate in that? So you can only innovate for a small window of time, and that's fine. If you can do that, great. But there's the recovery period, and that's when it doesn't happen, because it's not a recovery period; it's a burnout period, it takes people years to recover from that, and usually that's already outside of the organizations, because they either been let go because they weren't performing, or they failed, as Fredrik just said, and they were just like, see you later, or they left because they couldn't hack it, they couldn't handle it. It was just too much price, too big a cost for them personally, on themselves individually, but also the people around them, the families and close ones. And I think we need to start looking at these companies in through that lens, rather just the curated version. It's all great, they're great examples. No, there's a lot of dark stuff going on there, and we need to really be aware of that.
Yeah, I can tell you just about the setup at the Google Creative Lab where I worked, that we were like 40 full-time employees, and it's really, really hard to get in as a full-time employee. But then we had like 40 freelancers, and those freelancers, they came and went, sometimes on a daily basis, and we were pushing those freelancers to the limit, I would say, because all they wanted was to get a full-time job at Google, basically. So, and they had like thousands and thousands of people standing waiting just to come in, so it was very easy to maximize the outcome from those people. So in a way, thinking back at it, it was kind of designed that way that you just explained.
There you go.
Yeah.
It was an eye-opening opener for me a few months ago when I read an article, a very long article. I don't remember now the title of the author, but I can dig up the link and can share it with you, about what happens to people. And that element of, for a lot of people, the people actually never really truly recover. Because to be able to recover, you need to have the right support, and you need to realize that there was an actual problem, and people just kind of sweep it under the rug, that burnout. And it's something that affects people long term, that they carry with them. And my question is, where's the company's responsibility in that? Where is it? Let's make it clear, I'm not blaming the company. I'm not saying they are responsible for this, but I'm asking a question. Where is the balance between how long they've used them? Yes, of course, they paid them, they rewarded the person when they were part of the company. But once the person leaves the company, should there be an element of responsibility for the well-being of that person in their future? Open question.
Yeah, interesting.
But in a world where like, yeah, definitely. But in a world where a lot of people and companies look up to companies like Facebook and Google and Amazon and all those giants, obviously driving at least some people, pushing them way too far in their well-being. What would you say, like, is what's the takeaway of the learnings that you can use from those companies and to really bring some kind of innovation, because they have succeeded in being innovative in some kinds of ways, at least.
But I think the red thread is resources, right? They have unlimited resources, people, money, time, and not time, people and money, I would say. And just the fact that I talked about it before, but when at Google, we had like 3 to 4 different vendors working on the same thing because we could afford it and then we could pick the best thing. And I think, what, I mean, most of our clients that we work with on the top of agenda, what they're missing is resources, time and money to spend on innovation. And it's a very demanding thing. And as you know, we talk about quantity and quality, but also about being, keep pushing, keep trying, and find the right timing. And timing is everything, I would say. But keep pushing. So it's I would say resources. What do you say, Lech?
I would say resources for sure. That's something that they have, and they can continue circulating. And they've got that ability. They've got ability to do that, because if you're a small organization, obviously time, money is limited. So you pick one idea and you run with it, and then that takes off. You can do another one. So it's that waterfall versus agile, if you want to use that metaphor, rather than trying to do different things at the same time, which is what Facebook can do. I've actually coached a few people from inside of Facebook, and in the space of probably about 6 months, people from different departments, different parts of the organization, have gone through, I think, 2 reorganizations of their teams. They were people who just joined the company and were going through an reorg, which basically was putting their job at risk. And Facebook had their reasons. Obviously, I don't know the exact details of what the reorgs were, but it was merging 2 teams, for example. So it was basically a purge. It was to see who fits, whether they can be redeployed somewhere else, or whether we need to let them go. My question there, in that case, if you're concerned about the safety of your work, of your livelihood, or your paycheck, how much time and mental energy and mental space you've got to be innovative and creative and think.
Oh, that's I would say that's a big problem. But let's put the big dragons aside and focus the rest of the conversation on how can a more normal organization foster a culture to support innovation. What is your top 3 things?
My top 3 things. So we've covered the first one around psychological safety. That's probably the most important one. Is the elements of looking at that and making sure that things are ticking over, that people have that space to be able to share things, to be open about it. But then it's incorporating these behaviors that we mentioned, having these elements of being able to fail, but knowing and learning from that. So that would be another big thing. And there's quite a few things actually to mention here that I'm trying to figure out, trying to share. And you need to look obviously around things of maybe understanding where your team is as well, at what stages of development. So there are a bunch of models that you can use to see where your team sits. If it's a newly formed team, if it's a team that's been established, because obviously how they perform and depending where they are on that stage in their stages of development will depend on how they can perform overall as a team and therefore innovation. So you can use Susan Whelan's integrated model of group development. That's a very, very good example that we've got there. And depending on which stage they are, if they're forming, obviously forming, storming, things like that, that's Bruce Tuckman's, but they kind of overlap. But they will have more... They will have different types of innovation, because when at the start, whichever model you use, when they're just newly formed, obviously they will try and impress. There will be a lot of ideas, things going around. Great. But then when they move through the stages, they're a little bit more advanced, a little bit more mature. They'll start disagreeing with one another. And this is a very interesting stage. and very productive, counter to what many people believe, because we live in this culture where we want to avoid conflict at any price necessary. And I was just saying, no, actually, I would say encourage conflict, but transform conflict into collaboration to make it healthy conflict. Conflict is, if you look at it, it's a massive energy. And if you harness that energy, you can do incredible things, because it's a bunch of people coming together and clashing, different ideas, different opinions, different values. That's that you can either use that energy to set you back by months, or you can use that to build the future for years to come. If you listen to the right ideas, if you let people say, let that turn to collaborative effort. Yeah. That's really, really important. We need to redefine how we look at conflict. Conflict's not bad. Conflict is good.
No, not if they are, I mean, I love processes, as you know. So to me, I mean, using the right process, a conflict can be really good, as you said, or facilitated in the right way. But also, I mean, all three of us are very, we are a fan of the Noster T model, of course. We mentioned that on this show before. But it's two pillars there where that I find really important, at least when it comes to culture. It's also skills and incitements, because there's a lot of people that working with innovation that they don't have skills to do so, and that creates, fear and unhealthy situations, I would say. And then also we have, people don't know why they're doing stuff and what's the benefit. And also, if they have too much incitements of doing things, they can be very protective of their ideas, and it kind of spoils the whole thing as well, So what are your thoughts on those two pillars, sort of?
The skills, I fully agree with you. And I would connect it to the first thing that we mentioned, with psychological safety, is, again, people being able to say, listen, I don't know. I don't know when's the last time you changed jobs, either you two or people listening, right? But I've gone through a job change probably about 3 or 4 years ago when I moved from one company to another. It was my first job change in 6 years. Mm-hmm. I'm a person who has very good memory. I can recall stuff from years to the detail. And all of a sudden, I was forgetting conversations I had with people 2 days before. And I couldn't figure out what the hell was happening. And what was happening is the first 3 months were so intense because I was taking so much information in.
Yeah.
But what I've realized most of all is the fact that I was putting insane pressure on myself to know things I did not have the right to know, because they were internal to the organization I've just joined.
Okay, yeah.
And yet again, I was expecting myself to know things today that, taken months for people to acquire. And yeah. I didn't have that safety in myself, and the organization didn't make me feel that way as well, to raise my hand and say, listen, I don't know. And for that to be okay, without me feeling like an imposter, or me feeling like, oh, I should know this, all sorts of things like that. So that's the skills, again, coming back to that Noster T. Mm. The other thing was about purpose and values. Of course, it's one of those most basic things. It's something that we need to align ourselves with, because that's the North Star that people are able to then go, okay, this is where we're going, this is what we're doing. But where that fails is more on the organizational side. I would argue that if people don't feel the values, people don't feel the purpose, there are 2 reasons for that. They are not true. They're not honest enough. They don't honestly represent what the organization stands for. And people find it difficult to connect, because this is what it says on the poster, but in reality, it's completely different. And there's that mismatch. So that's one element. The other thing is that the organization is simply not ready. It aspires to have that purpose and values, and it wants to go there, but they're at a different stage. They're not ready just yet to be able to reach that.
But is that something you think an organization should be clear about, where they are today and where they want to be? When it comes Absolutely. To like values and purpose and ways of working and goals.
Absolutely, yes. They should clarify those things. They should be more than just things on. As I said, I always use the analogy of poster on a wall that you see in the corridor when you walk in, and that's the only time you interact with it. No, it's something you feel. It's something when you're in doubt. If there's an argument, if there's something you don't know how to proceed, that's what you relate to.
Yeah.
In terms of the values and the purpose. Okay, I don't know how to get to where we're going, but I know we're going that way, and I'll figure out the rest on the way.
So this is what we are. This is what we strive to be, and
this is how we get there. But I'm also a little bit interesting about, if you because now somehow we talk about established companies, but what about if you're a startup and you have the chance to do this right from the beginning? And we all know by experience that most startups don't do this, and they're going to bite them back in the back eventually. But is there any, first step to take to at least be aware and maybe avoid the deepest, black holes when you're creating a company?
Listen, absolutely. First of all, I would like to give startups a massive benefit of the doubt, the kind of credit they deserve. They've got other priorities. They are focused on getting people through the door, investors on board, selling the products, no matter what stage they're at, they're seed, pre-seed, or even the series A and B. I've actually recently been doing a lot of work and research into this, and I've identified that around series A, series B, that's maybe the time where they could look into that. So it's important to recognize that this is that we know, and it's easy for us to say you should be doing this. It's so basic and so obvious, but there's no point in doing that if they neglect the customers and the investors, and the organization, the company doesn't exist in 2 years' time. What's the point in investing in culture, right? So you need to have that balance. What I would say, the most important thing that they can do is be intentional about their culture. No matter what stage they're at, be intentional about it. The further you are on your journey, devote more time. If you're, let's say, Series A, you've received your Series A, you've got a bit of runway, that's probably a good time to devote 10% of your time, 5% of your time, however much you can allow it, to start having this conversation, looking at what this means. Because, what we love about startup culture is the freedom, the flexibility that people have. That's why people gravitate to it. And that's what makes them great. That's when they have that freedom to be creative and have great ideas, create great services and products. That's where the innovation happens, because of that free-flowing culture, the lack of structures, because everything's small. As you grow, that disappears, because you've introduced layers. All of a sudden, you were 10 people, now you're 100 people. You've got layers, you've got structures. You need to start thinking about what's going to happen so that the experience for the person that joins is the exact same, whether it's employee number 25 or employee 222 or something like that. That's the really the key. And it can be small things, as once a month have a check-in with the team, the people that are responsible, the people that are involved. Okay, where are we? Where are we going? What's working? What's not working? Simple team assessments. Self-assessment that they can run based on their purpose, the decision making, things like that. It's even if you don't say, okay, we work on our culture. No, what is culture? Culture is behaviors and values. That's what makes culture. It's the claim of people like us do things like this. To use Seth Godin's example, which I absolutely love. Everybody contributes to culture. Yeah, there's no such thing as no culture. We do things in a certain way, and that's culture. And we can be intentional about it. Just make sure that we spend a bit of time on, maybe this month we'll focus on how to give good feedback to one another. And that already is culture. That's working on your culture. Next month, we'll building on that, we'll focus, okay, how can we turn conflicts into collaboration? When the moments are heated, when we're angry, when we're frustrated, when there's a lot of emotion and energy, how do we channel that? Without being good. All those things.
Yeah, and I know a simple exercise that I can recommend is when you answer 3 questions about the other people around you. It's like what they should stop doing, continue doing, and start doing. I think these 3 questions that I can tell, Alexander, I think you should stop doing this. I think you should start doing this. I think you should continue doing this. As such a good feedback to give, once in a while. to each other.
Absolutely. The other one, even a simpler version of that, something that we don't do enough, if you think about it, because we often give people feedback about the bad stuff, the constructive stuff, when we want things to change. How about just giving somebody feedbacks like, I appreciate you for X, Y, Z. I appreciate that you did something for me.
That's a really good
how
one.
You handle that situation. A simple thing. Or turning feedback into using the nonviolent communication is when you do something or this situation made me feel in a particular way. This is how it's impacted me and how I'd like things to change, how I'd like to be going forwards. And then you share what's been going. You gave the person that you're talking a blueprint so they can understand. Oh wow, sorry, I didn't realize this could affect you this way. I just didn't think. It's not in my world. I wasn't intentional, and that's fine. It happens. But now you know, and you
I
can
think
say what to do about it.
It's a balance as well, because I've experienced organizations where basically whatever you do the full day is giving each other feedbacks, and that doesn't really get you anywhere either. So it needs to be a good balance. Otherwise, you should analyze every single thing you do, and you said yes, but that made me feel bad, and why? So it needs to have a balance, I think.
Absolutely, it needs to have a balance.
But I also think it's a situation where the opposite also takes place, where I think you and I had a conversation the other week, Lech, which was very interesting around. It was very related to psychological safety, where at least I have had a misconception that that's all about being as nice as possible, and that doesn't really create the real psychological safety around like giving feedback and being constructive and having these conflicts and argues that can really move us forward. I think it's not always too easy as well to use these argues and feedback in the right way.
No,
I think it's also very unnatural, because that means hiding your feelings, right? I'm sorry, if this is going to be an explicit version of the podcast, it might have to be. If you're pissed off, you're pissed off.
Yeah.
Because if you don't express it, you're bottling it up. I'm not a psychologist. I haven't properly trained to do therapy and stuff like that. But it's a passion of mine. So I'm knowledgeable in the area. But I know that if you bottle something up, it has to come out somewhere. Unfortunately, it usually comes out sideways, right? It's in ways that we don't want it to. And therefore, I would say the psychological safety is definitely not about only being nice. It's about actually creating an environment where I can tell somebody that something sucks. And the person realizing what I'm saying, that we're describing piece of work, not the person. And this is really important when it comes to feedback, is that the person who receives the feedback understands what is the purpose of that. I'm not saying you say to people, you suck or your work sucks, but that's a differentiation. You're describing a piece of work that somebody created, not the person.
Exactly.
The person giving that feedback needs to know that.
Yeah, and we a couple of episodes ago, we talked about giving feedback and also talked about Pixar's way of giving feedback, the plussing method. I recommend to go and listen to that episode. If any of our listeners did miss that, you can go back and listen to it.
Does it have English subtitles? If it does, I'd love to listen.
It doesn't, but let's talk about it on our next chat that we have.
Love to.
I'm thinking about going into the next segment. What do you say about that, Alexander? Are we ready for the goodie bag?
Definitely. Every week we have our weekly goodie bag, and this time it's actually the turn of our guests to share some goodie bags.
Yeah. So let's hit the jingle.
One. Definitely.
Veckans goodie bag. Ja, det var veckans goodie bag.
That was some really nice congas and song from my dear friend Fredrik. Did you like?
Yes, I could hear that lovely voice that I'd recognize anywhere. Yeah. Is it a different jingle every single time you do it, or is it one?
No, it's the same. It's the same segment every episode. We want to, create the psychology. What would you say? Psychologist safety here, so people feel connected to
I'd
what
love
we're
that.
delivering.
I love that. Okay, before I share, actually, can I share 2 things for the Goody Bag? Is that going to be okay?
Absolutely. Yes,
Okay.
please.
So I'd love to share 2 things. One is with the theme of psychological safety, something that will help open up the conversation. There's something called the social bullseye, which is a very, very simple workshop you can do with your team. That is, if anyone plays darts, where you throw arrows at a wall, you've got the different rings. That's what a social bullseye is. You get people from your team to put themselves on that bullseye, the closer to the center, based on how connected they feel to the team. The closer to the center, the more connected they feel. And that's a fantastic way of opening up a conversation with people. You can do it as a group, you can do it in one-to-one, because sometimes what you will find, people who are high performers, high achievers, and you would think they are part of the team, like strong core of the team, they will put themselves somewhere outside because for whatever reason, they don't feel connected to that team. And that opens a fantastic opportunity for further exploration. I'll send you the link to that. It's a DIY workshop that you can do it in Miro. I'll send you the link on my website. You can get it from there.
And is this also something they can reach out to you if they want you to run it for them?
Absolutely.
Yeah,
More than happy to.
And we will share
that.
your contact information in this post as well, so they know where to find you. Because sometimes it could be easier for someone else to step in and help them out, sort of.
More than happy. I could talk about it for hours. So if people have time, more than welcome to reach out. And the other thing I would like to share is for individual leaders. You can be a team leader, you can be a senior leader, anyone who leads a team or works within an organization. It doesn't have to be people who report to you, if for example, if you're a project manager. And that's the coaching matrix, which will allow you to decide based on somebody's experience and skill and the level of motivation and enthusiasm, what level of support you need to offer them. And you basically kind of group it, and again, I'll send you the link to that, so it's a visual thing. But you put people into one of 4 quadrants. They will let you decide whether it's people who you need to support because they're completely junior. They don't have the skills, or the motivation might not be there. They will require a different level of support, versus people who are highly skilled, highly motivated. They are actually probably better off left to their own devices. They just want to do stuff, and they'll come to you if they need support. Yep. Rather than you constantly. So it's about understanding, looking at your team through that lens and saying, okay, who needs what? Rather based on my own experience, I think this person needs that. No, have a look at that, place people in different categories, have a little read, and I'm pretty certain you'll find something amazing there as well.
Yeah, and it sounds like a simple, great tool. I went to study team building, back in the days, and I think they talked about 6 or 7 types of people, and it was similar to what you said. Some people just want to be left alone. Some people need guidance. Someone needs a list. A to Z, basically. This is what you're supposed to do. So, and it sounds like a great way of visualizing that. But also to have, as when you do I hate the word, but performance review with people. Let's say you're in this box right now, and now you want to come to the box where where you are left alone, basically, to do your stuff. I mean, everything that can be turned into something visual is a great tool, if you ask me.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So perfect. And we are trying to keep this podcast around 30 minutes, 35, 40, so we will hopefully get you back on the show again, because there's so much to talk about. That we barely scratched the surface on this.
Definitely. Very grateful for having you joining us, Lech. If people want to reach out to you, where can they find you?
The easiest way to find me is probably connecting on LinkedIn as usual. 2 other options if they want to follow what I do is also on my website, which is human.pm, or just simply by email, which is lech, Lech, @human.pm.
Great.
Yeah, and also to just, if someone missed that, I mean, you can help and facilitate these workshops to work with all these amazing tools that you have. And you mentioned 2, but I know, since we have talked a lot, that you have a full toolbox of great sessions to foster culture in an organization.
Absolutely. There's a bunch of resources on my website that people can download and try for themselves. I call them DIY workshops. They can run with those. There's a couple of there. But I do work with anything to do with company culture and in the widest way of improving ways of working. And that's at team level, where a team has a particular challenge, or maybe it's a new team that needs to form and they want to do it slightly differently than others. Then there's the process I can help facilitate, or it's helping leaders within an organization kind of develop a different way of working, develop playbooks, improving ways of working that they can then take to their teams and do with them. So maybe you can call it trainer kind of situation. But again, all of these behaviors, all of the activities and areas of focus that we discussed today, something that can be brought into these sessions. They can be workshops, they can be consultations, whatever it is. But anything to do with culture, improving ways of working, and playbooks, it's my deal.
And for God's sake, don't miss your podcast.
Thank you very much. I will do a shameless plug since you've been on it as well.
There's no shame about it. Just give it to us.
Definitely. It's a podcast focused on showcasing, a mission is showcasing organizations and people who put people first in organizations, do things differently. And I'm actually going through a stage. It was a mix of people like ourselves, people working from outside of organizations and going into organizations to help others. Now I'm focusing on actual organization case studies of how organizations do things differently. Yeah. And it's an important learning because it's on the ground, makes it more relatable to the listeners. So it's called We Got This. And again, you can find it on my website.
Yeah, we will put up a link for it for sure. And as you said, you're putting what we just talked about in context, which is really good to hear different stories, not only from people at Google or Facebook or Amazon, but real people.
Exactly.
Thank you so much for joining our podcast. And we are giving you a standing invitation to come back.
Gentlemen, it was a pleasure and I'd love to come back.
Have a great day.
Indeed.
Cheers. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Cheers. Bye.